Welcome. Were you guys waiting for me? Not bad, just 1 minute late. And if you knew when I left the house, you would be very impressed, I promise you. Anyway, welcome, welcome, welcome. It is Saturday, March 9. This is Wondrous Roots, your health from the ground up. My name is Rebecca Montrone. We have a practice here in Keene called Wondrous Roots. I'm going to turn my picture frame on. About time to turn my pictures. Do you guys watch those as they're going in the background? It's really kind of nice, but it's time to change it to spring. I got to get a spring slideshow up there. Anyway, I hope everybody can hear me. I've got to turn my volume up so I can hear you if you want to participate. Anyway, back to Wondrous Roots. So I am a holistic healthcare practitioner and herbalist. I have a degree in holistic nutrition, and I practice herbalism as well. I see clients in private consultation for all kinds of things, from wellness to serious health problems such as cancer and just about everything in between. I work with people of all ages, and I work with people locally, and I have very many clients out of the area who see me in. Let me see a chat. Okay, good. We sound good. Thank you. That was my sound check. So anyway, we do it this way. We do it Zoom. So I have a lot of clients I will never meet in person, and that's just fine. Okay, so what do I have to say about today? All right, so last week I wasn't here. We were traveling. We went to Philly to visit our daughter, and that was just a really wonderful, wonderful trip. We like to go down by train and on Amtrak and come back that way, and it's really fun. And then we just had a really good time all weekend long. So, but I'm glad to be back. I'm glad to have you here with me. So again, if you want to participate, you go to chat down there in the chat. You can type, or you raise your hand, and I can call on you, and you can speak. You can also write into the Q&A. So I'm going to just open my newsletter for a second, the one that I put out today that you all have. I also want to say, to let you know that if you don't get a newsletter or something, we had a bit of a kerfuffle with one of my very best attendees who's always here with me. And if you miss one, the link in all the newsletters to these webinars is exactly the same link. It's not different depending on whatever webinar it is. So do you understand that? So like if you click to join, click this link, that link is the same. It's set for every single program in this series. So if you can find an old newsletter or something like that, you can easily get on if you're having difficulty. So just wanted to make that clear. Okay. So I did say in this newsletter, this was really interesting. Sometimes, as I've told you many times before, sometimes I don't know what I'm going to talk about until the day I talk about it, or something will happen during the week where I want to talk about something. So that's what happened yesterday. So I'm going to just read this from my newsletter. Just yesterday afternoon, a gentleman popped into the shop. Friday afternoon is usually a hubbub in here. Just a lot of people. We're closed on the weekends, and a lot of people coming up and picking things up. And it can be really fun because we get a lot of conversation going on about various things, as you can well imagine, and probably have experienced if you've been in one of those cluster times. But anyway, came in to pick up another bottle of Monarda fistulosa, otherwise known as sweet leaf, which is not to be confused with stevia, which is why on my label I call it sweet leaf, because I don't want you to think it's stevia. Don't we see that? That's just, well, a lot of herbs, medicinal herbs, well, all plants, right, have their genus and species, which is in Latin, but then they have their common names. And we're going to be talking about that anyway, the naming of it. Fascinating, right? I bet you can't wait. You're holding your breath. Not to be confused with stevia, wild bergamot, eastern bergamot, and bee balm. So I'm sure many of you recognize the photo. I should just share my screen. Why not do that since I'm looking at it myself? Then you can look at it too. Get my participants over here so I can see you guys, and then get my chat up in case you want to chat so I can see that. And move myself around here. Okay. So you can see that now. So the wondrous thing about very common plants is that they are more often than not chock full of very uncommon abilities when it comes to improving health. And you have to know about them, how to use them though, right? We have to know. And that's a constant learning curve. It is for me. And I'm happy about that. I certainly, especially when it comes to plant medicine, I would like to learn so much more as time allows. But anyway, I had previously advised this gentleman to try Monarda for his ears. And yesterday he said after a few weeks, he felt them start to pop and clear. And I can't really remember exactly what his initial problem with his ears was. But you're going to find out in today's presentation why I recommended Monarda. So I don't recall. Yeah, I said that. However, during yesterday's conversation, I mentioned that I most commonly recommend it for tinnitus. So there's a lot of tinnitus. Some people pronounce it. I have no idea how it's actually pronounced, but I call it tinnitus, tinnitus, whatever. His eyes popped again, and he said something to his eyes popped. Said something to the effect that that problem was lessening for him. So in other words, I hadn't recommended it for that problem, but he's like, "Wow, that problem is clearing, helping to clear for me." So then I then went on to mention that Monarda fistulosa is also used for urinary tract issues. And when I say that, I don't just mean like you have a urinary tract infection. It can be you have urinary tract discomfort, or I would think it would be helpful for like interstitial cystitis. You have discomfort in this area, or you always feel like there's something going on there, whether there is or there isn't. So that's really cool. Candida overgrowth and vaginitis, bacterial vaginitis, that kind of thing. Which again, whenever I study a plant like this and I hone in on it again, I'm like, why am I not recommending that for this? Or why is that not in my Candida formula? Well, I know why. It's because of the dosing. But anyway, why am I not adding that on when I recommend something to somebody for that problem? You know what I'm saying? Okay. As well as for vertigo and Meniere's disease. When I mentioned vertigo, his eyes popped again. He said, when descending stairs, he used to hold on to the railing because of sense of imbalance, but he hasn't had to do that lately. And he also told me that another friend of his out in the Midwest somewhere is also using Monarda and seeing positive results. And I said, and then he mentioned the person's name. And I said, yeah, that person placed an order for a 4-ounce bottle of Monarda fistulosa this past week, which I was really shocked because you only use 3 drops 3 times a day. That's all you need from this extract. That's what works best. It works better than a high dose. So I was just really surprised to see somebody buying 4 ounces. So he said, well, he's sharing it with somebody he lives with or whatever. And so anyway, it kind of really renewed. And then people here were like, oh, what? So that's anyway. Then I mentioned that Monarda is said to enhance one's appreciation of beauty and art and music, etc. And he felt that was, so he said he was an artistic person anyway, but he said he felt that was something he could, having my mentioned it, say, yeah. So anyway, others in the shop at that time were listening, wanted to learn more. So it was at that very moment that I decided right there that Monarda fistulosa would be my topic today. The best way for me to tell you about this is to actually read the chapter out of Matthew Wood, the master herbalist Matthew Wood's book. His book is, the book that I'm referring to, he's got a lot of books, but is the Book of Herbal Wisdom. And Matthew Wood is a herbalist I've mentioned many times. He's the one I learned about plantain from for spider bites and things. When my husband was bitten by what we believe was a brown recluse spider way back in, I want to say maybe 2001 or 2. And I had just come back from an herbal conference where Matthew was speaking, and I purchased this book of his. And I read about plantain for that purpose. And it was the only place I could find that information. I could not find it on the web or anything. If I had not purchased that book, I don't know really what would have happened because the bite was getting really nasty. Anyway, this is Matthew Wood. And I have some other things there that I really encourage you to, if you're interested in this stuff, and of course, many of you are, or you wouldn't be listening to me and attending my weekly things or listening later on YouTube or whatever. So there's some things you can see here. He's got a 1-year program, an herbalist program, which I just looked at this morning, and I think I'm actually going to enroll in. The new session starts on my birthday, May 5th. And I would like to do some ongoing, what do they call that? Ongoing education, especially with herbs. I would love to, I have tons of books, but I would love to have just a methodical way to get back in and get some more knowledge, because there's so much in the world of plant medicine I don't know. There's so much to learn, and it's what I love. It's why I do this. So that's why I would love to go to these conferences and attend classes like with Matthew Wood, Rosemary Gladstar, Michael Tierra, David Winston, others who are just really excellent and are what I call the real herbalists. So anyway, there's that. So I was really thrilled to find, because I gave my daughter my copy of this book, and I have another one on order, but I have it all on electronic. The only way I could get it was screenshots, but then I found a way that I could convert screenshot to text, and I was able to make a nice PDF, which I'm going to read from, and which you have right here as well, that you can now add to your electronic library or print for later. So it is story time. I'm going to read. I know that's kind of probably a little bit boring, but well, it's not boring, because it's not boring. It's just not really interesting to look at, right? But who cares? So this is all about information. Now, I do, again, welcome you to interrupt me, to participate in any way, if it's a question or a comment or anything. I just really, as you know, always really value that. And I think you might be very intrigued. You might be interested in this plant for your own purposes. And so I am offering, I thought, what a great thing to do. A great way to get you to try it, or allow you to try it if you want to, without costing you anything. So for any online order of over $20, the reason I did that is because you actually have to purchase it. So it's with an order, right? So I'm not just giving it away, but it's with an order. But you have to purchase it and then do the code SWEET for me on checkout, and that will take $12 off your order. So the lowest price thing we have on the website is $8. So if you bought like a lip balm or something like that, you'd be all set for this. And then if you come into the shop, we're not just going to hand out a bottle with every person who comes in. They're not going to know anything about this. But if you've heard this, you've seen my newsletter, and you want it, you just have to tell us, and we will add that to your order. Okay, and so back to David. Back to Matthew. I was going to say David Winston. Back to Matthew Wood. So, and in some of this, you might think this isn't very interesting. Like, he's going to be talking about, say, the names and things. But this is kind of like what herbalists study. And so I think it's a good introduction to this if you're not used to that. And then some of you are into herbalism, heavy duty, you will enjoy it and understand it as well. And it has been the custom of authors writing on the botanical medicine and anthropology of the American Indians. And this is where Matthew Wood comes from. Maybe that would be a better place to start. Let me go back to his bio here. Matthew Wood has been a practicing herbalist since 1982, in a period when many authors and lecturers are merely armchair herbalists like me. I would say I'm a good student, and I'm a good formulator, and I'm a good apt student, but that's what I mean. He's like in the woods herbalist who offer theories and opinions based on book learning, and others have turned to the exotic traditions of India or China, which of course is fine. He has been an active practitioner of traditional Western herbalism. So think American Indians. He has helped tens of thousands of clients over the years with many difficult health problems. While Matthew believes in the virtue of many other healing modalities, he has always been inspired to learn, preserve, and practice the tradition of herbal medicine descending to us from our European, Anglo-American, and Native American heritage. He is a member of the American Herbalist Guild and has earned his Master's of Science degree from the Scottish School of Herbal Medicine, accredited by the University of Wales. So this guy, he's really good. All right, now go back to, I'll get there. Okay. It has been the custom of authors writing on the botanical medicine and anthropology of the American Indians to discuss their use of medicinal herbs in the past tense, as if these practices were long gone. This is a good technique for suppressing the magical feeling which is associated with this marvelous tradition, to which many people still look with nostalgia. However, it gives an entirely false view of the situation. By no means is Indian medicine dead. After the anthropologists with their fixed opinions left, the Indians went back to helping themselves, their friends, and their families as they always had. The Indian Medicine Society still exists. Here and there, the knowledge of herbal medicine remains from one end of the country to another. I have again and again met Indian people who unobtrusively prove this point in their humble use of the healing herbs. I have long been amused by accounts of medical anthropologists running off to the Amazon to discover new drugs, when I have learned so much from Indians right here in North America. Even if there were no surviving practitioners, Indian herbalism would never die, because the Indian ancestors remain in the psychic ethers of the woods and prairies of our continent. They will always be here to help their faithful children, whatever their color or origin. However, there still are many Indian practitioners. I was reminded of this recently. A woman I know was trying to contend with breast cancer without the help of conventional medicine. She had been calling a clinic in Sioux Falls for most of the day, trying to get through, but there was something wrong with the phones. When she finally gave up, there was a knock on the door. An Indian man she had never met before was standing there with some herbs. He said, "These medicines will cure you," and he has been helping her ever since. Monarda fistulosa is an example of a plant which is still widely used by American Indian healers from one end of the continent to the other, but which is hardly known to non-Indian practitioners. It proves the point that Indian herbal medicine is still alive, still operating in a parallel reality distinct from the dominant culture, still full of rich discoveries that the medical anthropologists have never dreamed of. I was fortunate enough to learn about this magical plant from an Indian practitioner. It has been one of the most valuable plants in my herbal cupboard ever since. And that's saying something for Matthew Wood, because his herbal cupboard is chock full. This is also a medicine plant which Cherokee herbalist David Winston, I was just talking about, has shared with the herbal community. He uses the red species, Monarda didyma. I originally thought, based on the accounts of Midwestern and Plains Indian people, because David Winston is a Cherokee Indian, that only the purple variety, Monarda fistulosa, was used in medicine. He corrected me, noting that the red species is preferred in Cherokee medicine. Indian, pioneer, and early medical practitioners also use the closely related horsemint, Monarda punctata. This seems to have similar but not identical properties. Getting the name right. I have never been able to resonate with the names for Monarda fistulosa found in the literature. Wild bergamot was derived from a vague resemblance to the European bergamot, a small, unrelated citrus. Bee Balm seemed nice enough, but there were half a dozen bombs in herbaldom. There are a half a dozen bombs in herbaldom. Oswego tea reflected local events in Western New York, not the essence of the plant. Monarda was pretty enough, but it was derived from the name of a botanist. To make things even more confusing, all these names are also applied to a cousin, Monarda didyma. This plant looks almost identical, but has crimson to burgundy red flowers. It has similar volatile oils and properties, but is not the preferred plant in the area where I live. Matthew is out west. David grew up in New Jersey. According to David Winston, it is and still is in that area, it is a very valuable plant with similar properties. The first thing I learned from Indian practitioners was the name sweet leaf. It was so beautiful and appropriate. I knew instantly that I would be able to understand this medicine. In Indian herb training, the apprentice is often taught the true name of the plant. This name reflects in some way the essential nature of the medicine and gives insight into its personality and application. Isn't this fascinating? It's so intricate. It's so beyond just the pharmacology of things. Sweet leaf is the perfect name. In half a dozen Indian tongues, the word sweet indicates something fragrant, tasty, or beautiful, someone like the English word fair. There is also an added inference in the word, as if there is an offering of bounteous richness from Mother Nature. These associations capture the essence of this plant so clearly. It is also known by Indian people as perfume or Indian perfume. This reflects the same root word. Sweet medicine. Sweet leaf is a member of the mint family. It grows in open fields and meadows which have not been cultivated for some time near the edges of forests along much of North America. It is cultivated in gardens as an ornamental. The pale violet, purple, lavender, or white flowers mature in a circle around the globular head so that the flower top looks like a little crown. All parts of the plant are high in essential oils, giving a rich, buttery taste and a magnificent smell. In Europe, 35 tons a year are grown as a crop for the volatile oils. It is often cultivated as a culinary herb, having properties similar to oregano. It combines well with lavender and perfumes and with sweet marjoram in cooking. Monarda fistulosa is one of a half dozen of the most important herbs used by the Indians of North America. It is considered to be a powerful medicine, a natural perfume, and a general good sort of thing to have around. It even has a place in ceremony, including the sun dance. Despite this background, sweet leaf was little appreciated by white settlers and failed to find a place in the domestic or professional medicine of the dominant culture. This may have been because Europeans had many of their own mints transported from across the ocean, but sweet leaf is still irreplaceable, if not simply the best of the bunch. Not only is sweet leaf largely unappreciated as a medicine, it is not correctly classified according to the Indian standard. The classification of plants by Indians and white botanists often differ. For instance, the old Indian doctors considered Trillium erectum, the white upright flower, which is a white upright flower, and T. pendulatum, red pendulous flower, to be the male and female representatives of the same species. The same idea applies to the white and red cohosh. In the case of Monarda fistulosa, the Indians recognize many different types where the white botanists see only one. Of course, no one would ever think of botanical nomenclature as a fixed or permanent part of reality. Melvin Gilmore addresses this problem in his Uses of Plants by Indians of the Missouri River region. This is a book published in 1919. He says that the Pawnee differentiated 4 types of Monarda fistulosa based on their fragrance, appearance, and use. They classified the best as parankaha, fragrant, sweet, and the least choice as sutsa hutu, ill-smelling. The first species has stems as weak as straw. The second has weak stems. The third has somewhat weak stems and small leaves. And the fourth has stiff, long stems and larger leaves. He's totally talking to the herbalist here at this point, but I still think it's so fascinating. So bear with me. We'll get into some cool stories shortly. Gilmore comments, the differences noted by the Indians among these varieties, if we may be allowed to call them varieties, are fixed and hereditary and not accidental or dependent on season or situation. Of this, I am assured by my own experience with living specimens, unquote. He transplanted representatives of the 3rd and 4th kinds into his garden and observed them for 5 years at all seasons. They continued to breed true and preserve their distinctive properties. Quote, I give this extended discussion because I have found taxonomists reluctant to admit the possibility of the distinction. At the same time, they did not put it to the proof. unquote. The distinctions between the 4 races of sweet leaf are still observed by Plains people today. In South Dakota, it is customary to prefer the soft-stemmed sweet variety. There are, however, other ideas about which plants to pick. Perhaps each batch should be assessed individually. The taste, smell, and properties of Monarda fistulosa vary greatly according to the location, season, and variety. The taste differs from extremely hot and pungent to rather sweet. The content and quality of the volatile oils will change quickly. Some samples taste buttery because of the high oil content. Others pick up flavors like asphalt or petroleum from exposure to chemicals. People will ask me, do you harvest your own herbs to make your tinctures and things? And the answer is absolutely not. Especially I would never harvest wildflowers unless I knew things with, like, somebody brought me elderberries one year and they have acres and acres and acres of meadow out in Westmoreland, right? I mean, so that's fine, but I would never use, bergamot that you would find along the roadside or something like that, dry it and use it. To be very careful with source because of those reasons. You don't want, chemicals, you don't want toxins in your herbal medicine. And these factors modify or destroy the medicinal properties. Here are the indications I look for in sweet leaf, which is Matthew Wood speaking, of course. The stems should be somewhat flexible and soft, as Gilmore remarks. One should be able to feel the volatile oils on the stalks, leaves, and flowers, right? I mean, that's herbalism at a level I don't do. The taste should be sweet, pungent, peppery, hot, and the most important, buttery. There needs to be enough volatile oils to cause this buttery sensation in the mouth. Generally, it is best to find a patch and keep picking from that spot year after year to get the same results. You can hang the herbs in bundles in the kitchen all winter. There is such an abundance of volatile oils that the properties are not greatly diminished by storage in the open air. Wow. The plant will last at least 2 years, even left in the open air. That's really fantastic. Okay, now we're getting into medicinal properties, right? Or application of this wonderful plant to physical problems. The right name leads to the appreciation of the essence of a medicine. So does knowledge of the characteristic action of that plant. If we can summarize the properties in a brief sentence that says it all, we are well on the way to having a new herbal friend. The person who taught me about sweet leaf understood this very well. The basic definition of the action of the plant was very simple. It draws out fire. In the American Indian medical tradition, burns are usually treated by applying hot to hot. This approach is sometimes found in European and American folklore, though more often the contrary idea, cold to hot, holds sway. In her excellent book, Country Folk Medicine, 1995, Elizabeth Janos alludes to the Native American perspective on the treatment of burns. She interviewed an Indian healer who sometimes gave lectures on Indian medicine. He explained the basic concept. A burn should not be placed under cold water, but instead it should be warmed. He used the proper treatment of frostbite as an analogy. If a person's extremities are warmed up too quickly, the pain will be more severe and the tissue may mortify. Likewise with the burn. If it is cooled too quickly, the healing process will be hindered. Very interesting. Remember my remedy, though, that I learned from my mother. Put tape on your burn right away, and it will just stop it. In addition to the idea of treatment by warm to warm, there is also a folk medical concept that fire is a substance that can be drawn out of the body. It will flow into something similar, hot, but not something opposite, cold. Doesn't that remind you? That reminds you, if acupuncture, Chinese medicine, traditional Chinese medicine, the yin and the yang, the hot and the cold, all of that. In short, sweet leaf is a plant which will draw out the fire. It is warm or even hot to the tongue, and it acts as a drawing agent for the particular substance of fire. As we will observe below, it is specific where the surface is cool, but the depths are hot. When sweet leaf is used as a burn medicine, the flowers are chewed up and the saliva placed on the area. Saliva contains an enzyme which activates the sweet leaf for this use. It must be the amylase. It may be necessary to clean off the area every few minutes if it is a bad burn. My friends and I have verified this application many times. Cynthia down the road uses it for sunburn. Quote, my son was burned on his neck. I went over and got some sweet leaf from the garden, chewed it up, and started to put it on him. Yuck, he said, I don't want spit on me. The next day he said, Mom, you missed part. Another time I was visiting some friends in Chicago. One of them burned her finger at the stove. She complained in a loud, plaintive voice, you're the homeopath, do something. I gave Cantharis, a homeopathic burn medicine, but nothing happened. So I had her put some spit on her finger and added some sweet leaf tincture. The pain disappeared immediately and the blister was gone in 15 minutes. I was surprised. That's the cool thing about herbalism. You've heard me say that. I'm like, somebody will tell me it worked for this. And I'm like, oh, I had no idea it would. So much to learn. And that's so interesting to know that you can do that. You can say, but see, I would have thought, if I didn't know that it was the amylase in the saliva, that it's the enzyme in the saliva that does that, I would think, well, just put the tincture on there, right? Because it's wet. You would think the saliva was just a way to get it moist so you could get the sweet leaf on there, the Monarda on there. But no, it's the saliva is actually drawing out the part. So if you were using a tincture for the burn, you would also put your saliva with it. Sweet leaf does not work on every burn and it does not always relieve pain, but it is important for many. It probably works best in those cases where there's a cold sweat accompanying the burn. Now that reminds me more of like homeopathy, right? Homeopathy where it's kind of like the cough, but does the person have a fever? Is it a dry cough? Is it that? Is this a person with, this kind of characteristic? So herbalism, very, very intricate. There's a lot of intuition that goes with practicing herbal medicine too, and that surrounds things that are not just, what does the test say? Well, my test came back and said my magnesium level is fine. Well, we're going to talk about that on another day, but we're so used to looking at what does the test say. It's not always just about the test and about the levels, is it? My favorite burn medicine is agrimony, or its cousin, cinquefoil. Here, the characteristic is that the pain causes the person to catch the breath. Okay, so it's like, nettles is also an important burn medicine, but I don't know the individualizing characteristics. Something even Matthew Wood doesn't know about a plant. Draws fire from the internal organs. Once we understand the characteristic nature of a medicine plant, we can expand upon its uses because we comprehend its underlying logic. I was not told that sweet leaf was a fever remedy, though it is listed as such in the books. But I figured that it would draw out fever the way it would draw out fire out of a burn. When I mentioned this to a person who first taught me about using it in burns, it was clear that he was fully aware of this usage as well. What sweet leaf does for a burn, it will do for heat in the interior organs of the body. Isn't this cool? It draws fire out of the stomach, intestines, lungs, kidneys, and deeper circulation. I've seen it settle hyperacidity. I've never thought about it for that. I've never thought about it for people with acid reflux. This is why this is important. Bronchial infection, diarrhea, and constipation, and especially inflammation of the bladder. This is really cool. We'll get into that. And that I did know about. But again, it's something that I tend to not think of right off the bat when somebody has that problem. It is so highly diffusive and diaphoretic, that means that it causes sweating, diaphoresis, that it opens the pores of the internal organs as well as the skin to remove heat. At the same time, it helps to retain the cooling fluids in the interior so that they are not lost through the skin. That's very cool. So you're not dehydrating. I find that sweet leaf is particularly effective when there is fever with a cool, clammy skin. When it is given in an appropriate case, the skin will change from feeling clammy to having a warm, oily sensation. The fever is coming out and the cooling waters remain in the interior. This is so interesting. Oh, this is a really good story. And you're all going to say, oh, I can't believe they did this with appendicitis. But anyway, it doesn't matter. I'm just reading. I'm not. Okay. One time I was shopping at Present Moment Herbs in Minneapolis. A woman brought in her 16-year-old daughter for bronchial asthma. Oh, this is different. Then we get to the next one. The shop clerks were harried and overworked, so I was drafted to help out. She was a beautiful girl, a student of ballet, a bit noble in appearance, with a straight back. I thought of Sweet Leaf right away. The skin was clammy and cool. I didn't have any Sweet Leaf with me, and the store didn't have any on hand either. But the family lived right down by the park where we had first seen the Sweet Leaf. I met them down there, and we picked some Sweet Leaf. I saw the mother a year later. Oh, yes, my daughter is completely cured. That was for bronchial asthma. I've never thought of this for bronchial asthma. Sweet Leaf has been at my side. I mean, I have thought of it because I've read this chapter many times, but I don't think about it when people talk about asthma. I talk about OSHA root. I just tend to go. So this is why studying is so important. Sweet Leaf has been at my side when I really needed it. An 18-year-old boy from a town just south of my farm came to the doctor with a severe pain in the lower right abdomen with swelling and tightness. It felt constricted, like a pulled muscle tensed up. The doctor thought it was probably appendicitis and sent him to the emergency room. The doctors down there thought the same thing. Quote, it's probably appendicitis, but we won't know until we cut you open, unquote. That didn't set right with the young man, so he refused surgery. The parents supported his decision. Quote, we trust in the Lord, they explained. The surgeon was quite flabbergasted. Quote, lots of people are praying for him, unquote, his mother added as they left. They gave him echinacea without much success. If things turned bad, his mother was going to make sure that he went to the hospital. While they were praying that evening, my name came up. These were people who really knew how to pray and listen for an answer. They had trusted their lives to God years ago. I got home late that night and was too lazy to run the messages off the machine. Imagine my surprise when I got to their message the next morning. Quote, our son has appendicitis, and we heard you were an herbalist from so-and-so, et cetera, et cetera. I called them right back and told them I'd be there as soon as possible. I wasn't worried about whether the boy would die from appendicitis and I would get in trouble. This family had faith in God, in me, and in the herbs, and I wasn't going to disappoint them. I was afraid to do the right thing, my life would be worth nothing when it came time for me to face my maker. Yeah, that's kind of interesting. I kind of like that. You have to just sometimes when you're practicing as a healthcare practitioner, you have to kind of have some courage. I would say I agree with that. In 20 minutes, I was at the bedside. The temperature was hovering at 100. The skin was very clammy. Perspiration filled the room with a rank odor. Glad I'm not there. The pulse was weak, slow, and lethargic. The tongue slightly swollen with adhesive coating, malar flush, eyes dull, pain in lower right abdomen, unmitigated. Has not been able to eat for 2 days, last bowel movement 2 days ago. He felt totally worn out, but incapable of sleep or eating. I put some echinacea angustifolia on his wrist, but it only produced a faint change. Interesting that he used the wrist. So the wrist is a good place for transdermal application of things, but he's just, he just put I would imagine a tincture right there on his wrist. Then I put a few drops of Sweet Leaf again on the wrist. The eyes and the skin dried off rapidly. I had the mother place a warm, moist cloth saturated with half a dropper of Sweet Leaf tincture on the appendix area. Half a dropper. Within a minute, he said, quote, my right leg is cold. Now it's cold and sweaty. Indeed, it was. I was a little unnerved to see such a prompt reaction. The father asked, so how long have you been doing this work? I love that. We soon realized it was a detoxification. I had him sip Sweet Leaf in water every 10 minutes for the next day. Within 4 hours, the legs stopped sweating. He slept well. 24 hours later, the temperature was normal. 48 hours later, he ate a little gruel. I saw him 3 months later, and he was in the bloom of health. Not only had he saved the expense of an operation, the family was uninsured, but the slow recovery that occurs after surgery. Furthermore, he had removed the stagnation or toxins that produced the problem and which would probably have caused other difficulties later on. Again, getting at the root. This is the brilliance of this. This is root medicine. So his leg, that whole thing with the leg got cold and then cold and sweaty. They realized it was a detoxification. So he had the detoxification needed, right? And if they had simply removed the appendix, the detoxification would never have happened. And whatever problems that would come from that toxicity would appear in other ways later on, most likely. What was most important, however, is that this young man had gained what the Indians call, quote unquote, medicine power. There's a special power, a confidence we gain when we put our life in God's hands. He had literally faced the prospect of death, and his parents had faced the prospect of losing him, but their courage, conviction, and connection brought them through. I was impressed, not only with the action of Sweetleaf, but with the courage of the family, the exactitude and power of their prayers, and the healing power of God. They were true Christians. They could stand up and testify to the healing power of God. The doctor this family first saw at the clinic was a friend of mine. Tom had been the teaching assistant when I was in a field botany class 20 years before. He was sympathetic to alternative medicine and loved plants as I did. He added an additional piece of the story. Quote, I sent them to the emergency room instead of a surgeon so that they would have more time to think about what they were going to do. Yeah, people who tell me they go to the emergency room, you're there a long time. You got plenty of time to think, generally speaking. And indeed, they use that time to make a spiritually wise decision. Tom likes to pun, so he also quipped, quote, it must be the right herb. The appendix is like a fistula, Monarda fistulosa. So that goes back to the doctrine of signatures. Remember, I've talked to you about that before. The doctrine of signatures, like gravel root breaks up stone in the body, like kidney stone, right? Because it has to break up stone because it grows in areas where it has to break up stone and to get down its roots down to where it can find nutrients. Or it has to break up stone to grow out of the rock. So that's a doctrine of signature. Skull cap is very good for anxiety, as a nervine, for calming the mind, right? And it looks like a skull. So the appendix is like a fistula, said this doctor, Tom. Monarda fistulosa is the name. It's just fascinating. Tom commented to the patient when we all met long after the incident, the Lakota have a saying, now is a good time to die. The young man understood exactly. If we stand on our principles, our life will have meaning and power. That is medicine. If we simply take the easy route, the obvious fork in the road, the statistically correct and conventional avenue, our life will not possess that spiritual power and testimony. It will be worth that much less. This, unfortunately, is the path of conventional medicine. Save the body at any cost, but ignore the spirit. Treat the patient like a statistic, not an exceptional person. In a sense, the word medicine has exactly opposite connotations in conventional Western and American Indian practice. For the doctors, it means saving the body at any cost, including the loss of spirit, character, and self-regulation. For the Indian people, it means connecting with something that comes from the great mystery, causes a change that the person by him or herself could not manage, and leaves the healed person with a little piece of acquired spirit power. Sometimes I think the differences between the two cultures are summed up in the contrast to the way the word medicine is used. Modern society is not geared to bring out the spirit, but ignore or even destroy it. A lot of food for thought here. Another dramatic story was related to me by one of my friends. Wendy and her friend Marianne were invited to attend a Sundance on the Rosebud Reservation, just this side of the Black Hills. They were going to be staying with friends. There was a white family who had been living with an Indian family out there for 5 years. The Indians lived in a shack, the whites in a tent behind it. The white woman had been bitten by a rattlesnake. She was just leaving the gate at a sacred spot where the Sundance grounds were being set up when the snake struck. One fang sank into her calf. The other grazed the skin. It could have killed me, she said later, but it didn't. It only sank in one fang. She was sure there was a lesson in it for her. The people took her to the Indian Health Board Hospital. The doctors considered her outside their jurisdiction, so she wasn't a tribal member, but they couldn't turn down an emergency patient. They determined that she was allergic to the rattlesnake antidote and sent her home. Then the medicine men came and doctored her. They said, "We will try to keep the swelling away from the heart." The leg was swollen to twice its size, and the swelling extended up to the diaphragm, but stopped just short of the heart. If the swelling got to the heart, they said it would kill her. In addition, there was a purple-black streak running through the swelling up to the hip. The woman was racked with pain and unable to sleep. This was the condition Wendy found her in when she arrived a week later. The woman was resting with her head and chest elevated slightly to keep the venom in the leg. She was so tense and out of it that it was hard for her to talk. At this point, there was no guarantee that she would actually survive. The skin was cool and clammy, but she said she felt she was burning up inside the swollen areas. It was like sunburn all over inside. She couldn't stand to be touched there like someone with sunburn. Wendy, Marianne, and the woman's daughter chewed sweet leaf flowers and put them over the legs and abdomen. They changed the medicine every few minutes. Within minutes, the heat started coming out, the swelling started to subside, and within an hour, they could touch the area. That night, she slept for the first time. The next day, Wendy noticed the purple-black color was not going down, so she put some elderberry tincture on it, and it started to break up. That evening, the women went to dinner at a friend's house. On the second day, the swelling was almost gone, and the purple streaks were turning red. She was able to take up her duties at the Sundance on the third day. That's quite remarkable. Draws fire from the urinary tract. Sweet leaf settles the nerves as well as fighting fire. As a remedy for nervous tension and burning pain, I thought it would be a great medicine for bladder infections. With experience, I found out that sweet leaf is unsurpassed in this complaint. It works in probably 9 out of 10 bladder infections, not only in people, but for cats. I'm a little embarrassed. I mean, my daughter just had a bladder infection, and I never thought of sweet leaf. Great, Becky. I have seen it work in chronic and acute infections when there is a wide variety of symptoms and differences between cases. Sometimes it helps when there is lingering infection in the kidneys, but I would not necessarily rely upon it for acute kidney infections, which are very rapid and dangerous in progression. These generally demand medical advice or faith in God. I would say faith in God and medical advice myself. After hearing about this medicine, my good friend Margie Flint, herbalist of the American Herbalist Guild, and Earth Goddess, in Marblehead, Massachusetts, adopted this remedy into armamentum. She had such success with it as a remedy for cystitis of unknown origins that the doctors at the hospital where she worked became very interested and started sending her patients. It has seldom failed her in this complaint. Some people get bladder infections from an unknown internal predisposition rather than a bacterial infection. There is no known cause. It is very painful and not easily treated. I can thinking of 2 people right now. Margie's experience suggests a possible new remedy in this complaint. Sweet leaf apparently works where there is whether there is a bacterial infection or not. That's really excellent news. Anything which is good for the urinary tract and removes heat and pain is also likely to help arthritic inflammation. In the folk medical model, the condition of the kidneys is directly related to the joints because the balance of fluids and solids influences whether or not minerals fall out of circulation, resulting in arthritis. I have not seen sweet leaf work in such conditions, but I have heard from reputable sources that it does. Sweet leaf is also beneficial for skin problems where there is pain imitating a burn. I once used it successfully for eczema on the scalp and eyelids. The skin of the forehead and forearms was clammy. Even a single dose notably relaxed the nerves and pulses. And I have someone with us today. You know who you are. When I say this, you're always talking about your skin burning. So pop in on Monday. We got to try this. You know who you are. Okay. Even a single dose noticeably relaxes the nerves and the pulse. An excellent remedy for yeast infection. I reported back to the person who first taught me about sweet leaf, noting how good it was for bladder infections. He didn't stop to boast. He just added the next piece of information. It was a very important remedy for yeast infections. Such conditions are often associated with infections of the bladder. After learning this, I gave Monarda for a vaginal yeast infection, and it worked. I was grateful to be able to have another remedy in my arsenal for this difficult to treat condition. There are so few. Barberry root deserves notice here. Okay, that's good to know. I told that's a barberry root is a berberine, and that would be like a golden seal. That makes sense. I told Pam Montgomery of Green Terrestrials in Milton, New York about using sweet leaf for yeast infections. A year later, she told me that she had used it 3 times for systemic yeast, and it worked every time. In the last few years, my friends and I have had quite a few successes with it in chronic candidiasis. So there you go. This is like amazing plant medicine, this Monarda fistulosa. Recently, oregano oil has appeared on the market as a remedy for yeast infection, vaginitis, and candida. Some of my friends say it works. I believe it would, since it is a native European plant very similar to sweet leaf in culinary and medicinal effect. Chronic yeast infection is usually associated with what is called leaky gut syndrome, where the pores of the intestines are too open and too much of the toxic contents of the bowels spills into the bloodstream, causing a burden on the liver and a generalized increase in toxic material in the body. It is believed that the yeast cells send down roots into the pores, which then keep them stuck open. It is my belief that sweet leaf works so well in many cases of chronic candida because it tones the pores of the intestines, just as it seems to tone the pores of the skin. Okay, so that would make it applicable to leaky gut, whether you have candida or not. It is for relaxed, open, perspiring skin pores, and it is possibly likewise probably active on the pores of the bowels and other tissues throughout the body. Calms and tones the nerves. Like many members of the mint family, sweet leaf is a sedative acting on the nervous system. The square stems of the mints or the rigid stems of other plants, such as cleavers, are a signature pointing to the nerves, both in American, Indian, and European herbal tradition. As we shall see below, sweet leaf acts strongly on the brain, mind, and senses. It also acts on the solar plexus and the organs supplied by nerves from the center: stomach, liver, gallbladder, and intestines. It is a good remedy for digestive complaints, where it is soothing, calming, and cooling. By stimulating the nerve reflexes, it helps the liver detoxify the blood, and it releases the bile from the gallbladder. It also livens up the intestines, improving the tone of the nerves and tissues of the tract. Thus, it is beneficial in complaints such as constipation, gallstone colic, and hangover. It helps clear the senses when the body is preoccupied with digesting a big meal or the liver is working on some alcohol, drugs, or poisons. I helped one woman who had constipation at an herbal conference. Her forearms were clammy, and I figured she had a nervous stomach from being in a different place. Probably the gallbladder reflexes were tensed up. The next day, she was regular. A few days later, I was at an astrological conference. One of the presenters was suffering from diarrhea. He was sweaty and probably nervous. I thought, if sweet leaf works for constipation with nervousness and clammy sweat, it will probably work here. Sure enough, the cure was quick and effective. Sweet leaf is used as a tea before the sweat lodge ceremony in some Indian communities. It promotes perspiration, relaxes the nerves, reduces tension, and brings harmony and beauty to the participants. It is also used to calm babies when they are crying or upset. There you go. That's another problem. This hints at an even deeper action of this powerful medicine and plant on the nervous system. It only not calms and tones the nerves, but it acts very deeply to restore and improve the nerves of sense and thought. I learned this unexpectedly from experience. I have never seen another remedy which acts so deeply on the nerves. Deep nerve problems. I was helping a woman named Carrie who had been diagnosed with atypical Meniere's disease by doctors at the Mayo Clinic. I figured that meant she had some anomalous nerve disease. I had her on homeopathic lycopodium for about a year. It stopped the dizziness and mental confusion and calmed down the ringing in the ears somewhat. I tried lycopodium in lower and higher potencies like a good homeopath, but it just wouldn't hold. Sometimes I had to insert an intercurrent remedy when some symptom or other flared up. Her life was kept livable, but she wasn't getting cured. Carrie had a friend who was a classical homeopath. Well, I think I could do better, she said. You should have just a single dose taken once. This woman had no respect for the difficulty of the case. Carrie said, I almost lost respect for her right there. Like so many classical homeopaths, this practitioner was a fanatic rather than a seasoned observer who understood the limits of our art. Eventually, Carrie felt obligated to give her friend a chance. The woman gave lycopodium in a high potency. All it did was make the low potencies I had been giving not work anymore. I had been helping Carrie for a year and a half, and I had been using Sweet Leaf for a few months when they collided in my mind. I didn't know why, but I had to try it. The effect was immediate and powerful. The dizziness, confusion, and buzzing were all dramatically improved. I only had a little bit of my preparation left, and I was going out of town, so I told her to call a certain little Indian craft store and get it from the proprietor, Gina. Could I use this to heal my esophagitis? I have an inflamed esophagus. Kathy, I think probably, possibly, but definitely try it. It sounds right. Get the burn out. And he talks about that, the hyperacidity and all that. Meanwhile, Gina was having a serious set of symptoms. She was suffering from dizziness, confusion, and buzzing in the ears. I was out of town, and so another herbalist she relied upon. Where are my medicine men? And so was another herbalist she relied upon. Where are my medicine men when I need them? She complained. She was even ready to go to a medical doctor. Just then, Carrie called her. Gina was busy and wanted to get her off the line, but when Carrie mentioned her symptoms, Gina recognized them as her own. She got some Sweet Leaf for Carrie and took it for herself and was cured. When I got back, Gina said, Matt, you're a real medicine man. You healed me even when you were away. Since then, she has used it to cure or palliate Meniere's disease and many other people. And you know, Meniere's disease results in vertigo, dizziness, and all that stuff. I told the story to a class out in Buffalo, Minnesota, west of my place. A woman got really interested in Sweet Leaf and wanted some of it for her tinnitus, ringing in the ear. I noticed that she had a bloated, yellowish complexion and thought, she ought to make an appointment and see me. She needs to get that gallbladder cleared out, probably constipated too. I thought her interest in Sweet Leaf was ridiculous. The story about Carrie and Gina was so crazy, even I didn't believe it would work again. Furthermore, this woman only had tinnitus, not Meniere's. Still, at her request, I got her some Sweet Leaf tincture. That was on a Saturday. On Wednesday, she called, quote, well, I haven't given up hope, but it hasn't worked yet. Of course not, I thought to myself. She ought to make an appointment to see me. I was just humoring her until she saw the light. She rambled on. I used 3 dropperfuls 3 times a day. That stopped me. What? I asked. The directions on the label say 3 drops 3 times a day. I suggested she try the lesser dose, though I was still humoring her. If it didn't work at 3 dropperfuls a dose, it probably wasn't going to work at 3 drops. I got a call the next morning. The very next dose of 3 drops gave our enthusiast diarrhea. It turned out that, yes, she had been constipated for 20 years. She woke up the next morning and the tinnitus was half gone. The ringing did not get better, but it didn't get worse after the initial improvement. But she was very grateful. Quote, I can hardly remember what it used to be like. It drove me crazy. Only then did I remember that Sweet Leaf was a remedy to open the gallbladder and stimulate the intestines. I love this, that even an herbalist like Matthew Wood is like saying the same things I did. Oh, I forgot. I totally forgot you can use this for bladder infection. Just forgot. Years later, I ran into this woman at a health food store. I didn't even recognize her because the swollen, bloated yellow complexion was gone. I commented, I see the gallbladder is better. Was about the limit of her reply. The ringing had eventually subsided, and now she had hypersensitive hearing. One of my students gave some Sweet Leaf to a man who was suffering from some nervous complaint. He immediately got a bit dizzy after the first dose. Within the next few days, his more grounded Sweet Leaf acts on the solar plexus slightly. My friend commented that he seemed more grounded. Sweet Leaf acts on the solar plexus slightly, like wood betony. This experience suggests that Sweet Leaf acts deeply on the senses. At any rate, more than anything, Sweet Leaf is a great medicine for Meniere's and tinnitus. Between my students, friends, and myself, we have improved or cured well over a dozen cases. There have been only 3 or 4 failures. Some people have needed and to take it for a long time. One of my herbal friends in New England started to use Sweet Leaf for Meniere's and tinnitus and has had much success with many people. In only one case did it not work. She believed this was because the person had been dosed with radiation in the past. She did, however, help him with another problem. Just as he was leaving, he mentioned that he was having a difficult time with a tenant upstairs. He lived in the downstairs of a duplex he owned. He was afraid to kick her out because she was a spiteful, vengeful person who knew all the legal loopholes and would make trouble for him. My friend gave the fellow Sweet Leaf for the Meniere's and a spray bottle with some agrimony in it. Remember how we use that for interference. That's in his book in the chapter on agrimony, very interesting about changing your environment. He sprayed it all around his apartment and the one occupied by the tenant. In 2 days, she complained how she hated the house. She hated the house. She gave her notice and moved out that very day. The whole thing was not only a great relief to the landlord, but a remarkable testimony to the influence of a plant. My herbalist friend said, quote, "Don't tell anybody about this or they'll run me out of town on a rail." So her name remains unknown, though I would like readers to know that these strange, miraculous healings and magical shifts happen to other people as well. Back to Sweet Leaf and a more scientific approach. During a lecture, we're after time here. If you have to go, go ahead, but I'm going to continue because we're coming to the end and I just don't want to, we're almost just a little bit more, but there's another really cool story. So if you have to leave, I'm sorry to see you go, but you can pick up the YouTube later. Okay. In a more scientific approach, during a lecture attended by one of my friends, ethnobotanist Dr. Jim Duke, James Duke is a famous ethnobotanist, noted that based on its chemistry, the late James Duke, Monarda fistulosa should be one of the best candidates as a remedy for Alzheimer's disease. Personally, I don't know much about plant chemistry, but this made sense to both myself and my friend. Sweet Leaf has such a deep, searching, cleansing, building, and restoring influence on the nervous system. It helps subtle nerve processes, which are associated with the ability to perceive, appreciate, and express beauty and harmony in life. The passion medicine. It took me a long time to understand the personality of Sweet Leaf, though now it seems transparent and clear to me. This is the medicine that helps us appreciate beauty and deal with passion. Such a problem is so deeply human and must be widespread, but I had never thought about it as something an herb could heal or influence. One time I was leading an herb walk in Wisconsin. I gave a sprig of Sweet Leaf to the woman nearest me and went on talking. In a few minutes, she said in a concerned and confused tone, "What was that supposed to do?" Well, I stammered, "What did it do to you?" I was expecting her to say that her throat was swelling up or she was having a tachycardia attack and we needed to bring her to the emergency room. Fortunately, I was pleasantly disappointed, right? I just so get this as a practitioner. You're out there, you give somebody a plant to eat. You're on a weed walk and she's like, "What was that supposed to do?" And you're like, "Oh no." But she said, "When you gave it to me, I suddenly heard this whole symphony orchestra playing this beautiful piece of music. It went on for a minute or two before dying away." She said all of this as if something wrong had happened. She was a passionate person who, however, sometimes mistrusted having strong feelings. I forgot this experience for a few years, but it came back to me when I began to appreciate the personality of this wonderful plant. I also remembered the 16-year-old aspiring dancer who had the asthma. Remember, I talked about her in the beginning. He talked about her in the beginning. Sweet Leaf is a medicine plant which helps us to sense beauty around us and also helps us deal with the passion that is stirred as a part of our human nature. Wow, it's so cool. Nature's medicine. Sweet Leaf is one of the primal healing plants of North America. It illustrates one of the 7 great truths which we confront in the medicine path. I mentioned these 7 lessons in my book, 7 Herbs, Plants as Teachers. And that's another book of his you can get. The first lesson on the path is that nature is alive. She offers her goods to us. These include the beauty and richness of the land and of all natural beings. Each is supplied with some part of this richness. We are stimulated by this beauty. We are endowed with passions and loves which attract us to different people, callings, places, and things. We need to work with the resources of nature, Mother Nature, to live and follow our calling. We need to do this in a way that is respectful. If we do not respect our mother, of course, you know my feeling about all of this Mother Nature stuff. It all comes from the Creator, right? Who is God. But anyway, he gave plenty of endorsement of that earlier on. We are worthless. Sweet Leaf teaches us to perceive beauty, to trust and go with our passion, to create something else that is beautiful, and to respect the sources of our inspiration. There is within each one of us a little piece of Mother Nature, he says. Our personal life is a fragment of the all life. It is a precious gift which should not be taken for granted. This too we should treat with respect. It would be better if we did not burn up this gift of life in wasteful pursuits, though it seems to be our nature to do so. Well said, Matthew Wood. This little sliver of life is like a drop of mortal oil, which burns from birth to death. When the oil burns out, the flame goes out and the life is over. The old alchemists had an idea that the volatile oils in flowers were a food for this mortal oil, which kept alive this wick of life. Alchemical doctors like Paracelsus liked to give lemon balm, Melissa officinalis, as a general tonic. It is one of the European herbs which contains the most essential oils. Melissa was believed by the common people to be an elixir of longevity. Sweet leaf is probably the best American analog of lemon balm. I like to think the volatile oils contained within it feed and cleanse the oil of life burning within. The volatile oils of sweet leaf are sometimes valuable as a food which needs to be consumed from time to time. I have known a few people who have to consume sweet leaf or similar culinary herbs with lots of volatile oils on a regular basis in order to remain healthy. Remember that the remedies that are sweet, full of juiciness, beauty, and aroma are the dear medicines. The mints and other plants with their fine, sharp-edged stems are also lumped together in this group. Indeed, any plant which helps us to understand and cope with beauty is a deer medicine, or if it is used as a love charm, an elk medicine. Sweet leaf is used as a perfume, so it is also a love charm. It grows in the kinds of places where the deer frequent, in old fields near the edges of woods where feeding and hiding are hardly a breath away from each other. Now, preparation and dosage, and this is how I learned to dose it properly, because it's very different from other tinctures, and I learned it right here from Matthew Wood. Sweet leaf should be picked when the flowers are at their peak. Fortunately, this plant is in bloom for about a month in July and August. The flowers, stalks, and leaves are all used. The herb is just as good, fresh or dried. Leave the roots in the ground or to grow another year. Since I am accustomed to using tinctures, which I am, I make mine by macerating the fresh or dried herb in vodka. For some reason, it does not turn out well if brandy of equal proof is used. So we use grain alcohol and water, which is similar to vodka. For some reason, it does, okay. The dose is small, 1 to 3 drops, 1 to 3 times a day as needed. In acute fever, one may need to give it continuously. If you use this plant for burns, you have to add your own supply of saliva. Wild bergamot, sweet leaf, is used in the culinary arts and has no known toxicity. It is classified with the many safe mints that are used in cooking. Wow. I mean, I feel almost choked up over this. This is quite amazing. So remember, you can, with any order, if you ask me in the shop or if you order it and use my promo code, SWEET, all caps, SWEET, the number 4, me, caps, when you check out, you'll get $12 off your order, which is the price of a 1 ounce bottle. I don't say this like, okay, everybody, I want to sell this now. That's not really the point. The point is more, wow, give it a try and you don't have to buy something to do it. I have a Q&A. What if I suffered with tonsillitis for 10 months before diagnosis and surgery? Is the infection still in my body? I don't know. I have no idea, Karen. Sorry about that. Tonsillitis, infection still in my body. I don't know. It's something I'll have to look into. I certainly will. And I have an email from you too. I need to get to and respond to. I do realize that. All right, we are about 10 minutes over time, 9 minutes after the hour, top of the hour. I'm glad you stayed with me because this is fascinating, isn't it? And I am very excited. Later today, I'm going to see about enrolling in Matthew Wood's next session of his course because there's so much to learn. And if I have to do work for a course, right, then I will, just like I do this program. I learn so much just because I make it an obligation. It's my own obligation to myself to do this. And so I learn so much that otherwise I might not take time to do, to spend on these things. And I'll be sure that I'll be sending many more wonderful nuggets and tidbits from herbal medicine. And, I love just like Matthew Wood, just like I do, we try things on people. Sometimes I'll be like, oh, I'm so glad you're trying this for this because I've read that it should work, but I don't know if it's going to work for this or whatever until I get enough people to try it. So this is good. So please try it and let me know what you find out. That would be really cool. So anyway, everybody have a wonderful day. I did not give my introductory things. We're at Wondrous Roots. The phone number here is 603-439-2603. Our open door hours are 9:30 to 5, Monday through Friday. And you can reach out to me from wondrousroots.org or shopwondrousroots.com in the contact us, and I will get back to you. Thank you again. Have a great day and be well.